James, your dedication to Oak Island is quite palpable, obvious, and I actually like the fact that you go back year after year and you revise or tweak your theory a little bit. It means you're open-minded and humble enough to say, oh, maybe I could add some more. It's, wasn't maybe perfect from the start, but I think it has really good bones. And whatever other artifacts are found, you will just plug them into your theory.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. In fact, I should do this, is I should rewatch the shows or check online or whatever and find every single artifact that does fit into the window of my theory. One thing that's interesting about carbon dating is that carbon is basically burnt wood. So carbon dating is based on burnt wood. So that you would think would be the simplest, most accurate thing to carbon date. But the problem is they don't know when the tree fell. That somebody could have used a tree that fell X number of years ago or whatever. So, or they could have felled the tree themselves, but their grandson used it, whatever. So in the old days, they used to give it like a birth of like 70 to 80 years either direction. Now I see by some of the dates on Oak Island, it's more like a 25 to 35 year window. But so when people wonder about that, that's the story behind it. It's all about when that tree quit living. Mm-hmm. That's when the carbon date starts deteriorating. So anyway, there's so many of them that fit, and there could be another theory that somebody could sit here and talk to you and say, yeah, there's so many of them that fit my theory, 1575 or whatever. Fred found 60 identical stakes in the swamp. They were showing those stakes that they found. I mean, relatively identical. They were 30 inches long. They were 4 inches at the top and 2 inches at the bottom, whittled down. I actually got a photo of them, one of them from Doug. And they dated to 1700 plus or minus something like 70 years. So now that puts them well into my 1632 date too. And that's 60 identical stakes that could be from my time period. So there's a lot out there, and I appreciate hearing it all.
What do you think about the flood tunnels? Do you think that the Scottish adventurers and treasure depositors would go into the trouble of installing some flood tunnels?
Well, I think the jury's still out on them, because you can get a trained geologist who says they're flood tunnels, and you can get a trained geologist that say they're just natural waterways under, and the same way with the caverns underneath. So I'm not a trained geologist, and I've never studied the issue up close. There's no doubt that they could have built even the wildest dream of what people think is there as far as structurally, that they could have done that, because William Alexander and his son John were the masters of mining for Scotland. They had a 180-foot hand-dug well silver mine in Scotland, and John is the one that moved back there from 41 to 54, and he apparently had a son born there in 25, so he was in the area a lot. But in addition to that, Anthony, the world's second Freemason, was the master of public works for Scotland. He was building cathedrals and castles and bridges and all of that. And when he died or disappeared, his brother Henry was put in that position. So you have two masters of public works and two masters of mining for Scotland involved in this story. So I've been in cathedrals, I've been in buildings that are BC, but I've been in buildings, particularly in the 13 and 1400s, particularly churches, that are just so phenomenal that you couldn't even probably find a craftsman today that could make even just the spiral staircase that went up to where the deacon stood. They're just so unbelievable. And so to think that somebody couldn't dig a hole and dig a flood tunnel and make a cavern that could do all of that, plus the fact that every ship, I told you that I believe they sent 17 ships over a period of years. Every ship had its own carpenters and blacksmiths, because quite often their shipmast would break in a storm and they had to find land somewhere, find a nice big spruce tree or something and make a new mast and hook everything up. And that's the other point, is that, people, you hear it so often, well, how can a bunch of pirates or how can a bunch of settlers or whatever be so smart? Well, they were there to build towns, and pirates were pretty smart people. I don't know if you've ever sailed on a tall ship, but I've sailed on 2 of them, and it takes manpower and teamwork and uh, uh, complicated rigging and all that to sail. And so, if they could sail a ship, they could sure as heck dig a hole in the ground. So I think that no matter who it was, the skills were there to do it. I don't think that needs to be wiped off the plate totally. That theory that somebody couldn't do that stuff. Of course they could do it.
James, I believe that you identified one of those 17 ships as being near Oak Island in the form of a shipwreck.
Yes. I forgot to talk about that. So in 2019, Rick, when I got up there, he said, I have, well, he told me ahead of time. He called me and said, I want you to talk to this sea captain. He's a lifelong sea captain and treasure hunter. And so I've set up a 2-hour meeting with him. So I get there the night before, and I'm in the lounge there at the Atlantica Oak Island Resort, and Doug comes in. He said, oh, I'm so glad I found you. He said, Rick wanted me to talk to you. He said, this guy is a very salty dog with his language. He loves to command the conversation. And he was so stubborn in telling us stuff that we're probably not going to use anything that we filmed in the war room because he just was so stubborn. So he said, I just wanted to warn you, if you get in with him and you're uncomfortable, just say, well, I got 5 more minutes or something and you can leave. I got in there. I love this guy. He used some choice words, but any sea captain would. And he just had so many stories. And the main story that we were to talk about was this shipwreck that he dove on. And what's funny about the shipwreck is I didn't know a thing about it. And then Doug sends me an email. This was about a year before, maybe half a year before. Doug sends me an email, don't talk about this ship, blah, 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 And I didn't even know what ship he was talking about. I just said, okay. Then I'm up on my rafters, up on the ladder with the hose and the gutters cleaning out junk when Rick calls me one day. Mr. McQuiston, can we talk? I said, I'm up on the ladder with the hose in the gutter, but yes, hold on. So I get down off the ladder, talk to him. So we're talking about a bunch of things about me coming up. But he said, oh, by the way, that ship. And he told me more about the story and who the guy's name was and everything. But then he said, but don't talk about the ship. So I'm thinking, well, 2 people have told me not to talk about it, and I didn't even know anything about it to talk about it. So then Prometheus calls me because they were setting up the actual non-disclosure agreement, as you know, how those go and everything. And they send it to you digitally, and then you got to sign it somehow digitally and get it back. And I literally was on the road one day, and they said, you got a half hour to send it back. And I signed it with my fingernail because there wasn't anything else I could do to get the thing back to him. So, because I didn't have a computer or anything, I was just looking at it on my phone. So anyway, they said the same thing. Don't talk about the ship. So I did. The only thing I knew about the ship was what these 3 people had told me. And I didn't know I was going to meet with this gentleman. So I went in the next day and met with him for 2 hours. And yes, he was salty. Yes, he controlled the conversation. And I got the inkling that Rick wanted me to meet with him to ask him where the ship was because he wouldn't tell them. So I said, oh, by the way, where is this ship? And he said, well, I'm not going to tell you. He said, treasure hunters don't tell where the treasure is or they won't be the ones to get it. And I kind of laughed. I thought, I never really actually heard that before. It's kind of funny. And he probably threw a few choice words in there as he was saying it. And he said, I'll tell you this, it's within sight of Oak Island. And what was very exciting for me was he took a lot of notes when he was diving. He did bring up some items, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But he took a lot of notes, particularly of the cannons, because that's one way they can identify shipwrecks and dating and all that. He went to the underwater archaeologist that worked with Mel Fisher on the Etosha, showed him his notes. The guy said, estimated the boat to be built around 1600. It was either an English or a Spanish ship because they were the only 2 ships that used what they call the trunnions, which hold the actual cannon to the thing that keeps it from sliding all over the boat. And they were the only two using that. And he said the only thing I was able to bring up was silverware with a stag on the handle. He brought up one big spoon and a bunch of forks. Well, the stag's been the symbol of the Strachan family since 1309, and even John Strachan, who owned Owens Cross lots, had built a ship. It was the fastest ship ever built in Nova Scotia at the time, and he called it the Stag. It ended up sinking down by Bermuda, where a lot of ships have sunk. But so when he said that it had a stag on the handle, I mean, I just couldn't believe this, So he said, if anybody's going to, he said those blankety blank treasure trove laws, he said, if anybody's going to dive on that ship while I'm alive, it's going to be me. So then, somewhat out of the blue, it was about 3 months ago, I think now, he sent me an email and he told me where the ship was. And he trusted me. And so I can't violate his trust. And the only reason I can think he did it was because he's an older fella too. And he might have thought, what if the day comes and I'm not around and nobody knows where the damn ship is? So I got to tell somebody where it's at. So he didn't tell me exactly, but he told me the mouth of the river that it was near. And so I'm sitting on that just because out of respect for him, but I've had to sit on a lot. I couldn't tell about the war room. I couldn't tell about the stonemason's chisel, all that stuff. So even though it's aggravating at times, I've gotten used to it. And so it's more or less to honor the guy, So I was with him for 2 hours. He said, well, I have to apologize for my language and for trying to control the meeting. And I was keeping my best poker's face because this is exactly what Doug told me the day before. And I said, oh, no. I said, I could sit here for another 4 hours and listen to you talk. It was just so amazing, the stories he was telling me.
What did he think about your idea that it could be a Scottish ship from this fleet, Sir William Alexander's fleet?
Well, he didn't discount that. He said it's because even though William Alexander and Charles were Scots, again, they were using English items, including English ships. So it could be called, there was a 50-50 chance it was English, which could be the same ship they brought over. But he 100% agreed that they could not sail the North Atlantic. He said, believe me, I was up there in April once and I got hit with 80-foot waves. And he had a crew member with him this whole meeting. And he said, I told the guys, go down below and get in your sleeping bags. So he said it was really cold. He said, if I can't save us, we're not going to get saved. He said, so I just kept heading the nose into those waves until they finally dissipated, and I got us the heck out of there. And he said, and also I was up there in June one time, and I woke up on our fishing trawler, woke up in the morning to a foot of snow on the deck. So he said, absolutely. He said they would be heading into hell to try to cross the North Atlantic in April of 1632. Well, I also found a weather record that Nova Scotia did that showed the weather on the leeward side, which would be Port Royal, to be dramatically better than the weather on the Oak Island side. And I looked at NOAA's records for 3 years, and every year it was about the same during April. Waves 20 to 30 feet, with some waves twice that height. Winds, real high winds, and freezing spray. And freezing spray is the biggest culprit, because even if you could ride out the wind and the waves, if your mast and rigging and everything is getting covered with ice, it's going to take you down. I don't know if you ever watched that Deadliest Catch show, but when they get all iced up, they take baseball bats out there, and they have a metal ship, so they're not going to hurt the metal that much anyway. And they just hammer on that ice and throw it overboard. Well, what are you going to do on a wooden ship? You'd beat your ship up. So he put it pretty succinctly. They'd be heading into hell, but they would. There just was be no way. And I even looked at Jacques Cartier's records, and he talked about how cold it was and how much ice was along the shores and in river inlets and all that. And I noticed that each year, every trip he made was later than what the Scots would have been sailing, but every trip he left a little bit later, so like by the last trip, he was like a month and a half later, because he knew what he was going to sail into. So he was 100% in agreement that if they got that order, which it's dated March 29th, if they got that order then, there's no way they could have sailed back. They would have had to take port somewhere, and Mahone Bay and right behind Oak Island would be the absolute best place to go. He also was the one that talked about them spying on the French from, beachhead or whatever at New Ross. So he was in agreement with the theory, and he couldn't say whether the ship was English or Spanish, but it was one or the other. And even if it, they find Spanish coins, and I'm not saying the Spanish weren't there, but it wouldn't be unusual to find Spanish coins on any wreck, because the Spanish coins were the US dollar of today. We're like, the euro was trying to take us over. It almost did, but the US dollar is the standard everywhere, even in Russia, that everything's compared to. Well, back then it was the Spanish dollar. Mm-hmm. So everybody traded in Spanish dollars because it was the one thing that could be counted on. And you've certainly heard the expression pieces of 8, and that was a Spanish coin. And but all these English, French pirates, everybody was trading in pieces of 8, So when they find something Spanish, I kind of write it off a little bit. I don't believe they found anything that's French. The only thing that they said that might be French was what Gary had identified as like a band on a cap, but it was the fleur-de-lis pattern. And the fleur-de-lis, even though it's a French word, wasn't even originally painted in France, and it was used all over Europe. It just happened to have that fancy French name to it. So there isn't any proof that. Oh, I got to tell you about a find that is really cool. I mean, there's just so much, but Robert Young owns Lot 5, and they don't deal with him, and he doesn't deal with them. But on his website, he had a cricket badge, part of a cricket badge. So I told Doug about it, and Doug said, well, we have one too. So I had the photo off Young's page, and I've been waiting for Doug to go find it amongst the million things that they have, so we could see if it's the same team or if maybe it was 2 different teams. But I did find the World's Expert Museum on Cricket, and I sent the one photo off to them, and they have not responded to me yet. But all I want them to do is try to identify where that team was from. But I looked up cricket, and it actually started like in 1550. And by the 1600s, it was the biggest gambling operation there was. Everybody was gambling on cricket games. So, these guys, they were human. They had to have something to do. So that cricket badge, both those cricket badges, or pieces of them, could date all the way back to the 1600s too. So I need to get that museum to cooperate better. Most museums, I'll have to say, are right there. That, like, the next day they send you more stuff than you can even imagine about something, because they're all excited about it too. This particular one, I don't know why, but like that, where I told you the treasure chest they opened up in the Orkneys, their curator wrote me right away and wanted to know everything I knew about the treasure and how it got there, and they told me everything they knew about it. So most people that work at museums are history nuts, and they want to play the game of Clue too, So,
James, did Sir William Alexander make a map of Oak Island or New Ross? And did he give its names? Oak Island, did he name Oak Island or his place in New Ross? Did he come up with a place name?
He published the map in 1624, and nobody knows who drew the map. But if you believe King Charles, that Alexander traveled to Nova Scotia and surveyed it, then it could be assumed that he's the one that drew the map, since he, and so he draws a rough outline of Nova Scotia, and he puts a community called Lukesburg, which was, I think it was Lukesborough, like Edinburgh, Scotland, Lukesborough, named after the ship that went. It was the St. Luke, and that's down by Port Mutton. I don't know if they still pronounce it Mutton there now. It originally was Port de Mutton, because a sheep jumped ship there, and so Champlain named it Port Mutton after that sheep. So he named that area. When he gave the grant to the Latour men, in that grant he called that area Merlegash. And typically you'll hear that Merlegash was a native name for Lunenburg. But it was Doug and a lady named Sylvia Delorme, who was translating a French document for him. She's the one that noticed that it looked like it was Gaelic. So Doug wrote me and he said, "Could you see if this would be Gaelic?" Well, yes, I found a document all the way back to the 9th century that used the words Mir Lagash and Lagash, each word separately. But I did extensive study in Gaelic dictionaries and translation softwares, and Mir meant part of, and Lagash meant an alliance. So the very first time the word is ever recorded is in that charter of the alliance being formed by William Alexander and the Latour men. So my assumption is that he named it Merlegash right then. And then I found several other maps. I think you might have sent me one from 1702, I think. And that gentleman was the first official cartographer of Canada. He was French. And he called the bay Merlegash Bay, and the river up to New Ross, Merlegash River. And there's another map that shows the word Merlegash right across where New Ross is. So I looked at the original charter, and the charter says from La Have 15 leagues to the north. The surveyor told me that back then when they said north, they meant north along the coast. Along the coast was all, because that was the only bearing they had. They hadn't been inland very far yet. And what else would you pick a rock or a tree or something, so they would pick the coast as the bearing for everyone. Well, 15 leagues, based on about 3.5 miles per league, would take you all the way past St. Margaret's Bay, which would be plenty past Mahone Bay and Oak Island. And Champlain had actually also written that he traveled 15 leagues from La Have up to, I think, Cape Sambro. So we know that the actual charter for Merlegash said it was 15 leagues, and it said in the seas and the land. That's what's specific wording. So that would include New Ross, it would include Mahone Bay, it would be a circle 50 miles around La Have. And that name kept cropping up. I found some French documents. I found a French map that named it 3 times. It mentioned Merlegash on the same map. I overlaid their map right over top of the current day's map, and it landed right on top of it. I had to tweak a little bit, but considered it was 400 years ago. But I mean, I didn't really tweak it. I mean, just general tweaks on it. And it certainly didn't match Lunenburg Bay by any stretch. And then there's another thing online that says that Rosilly, the French leader who got there in 1632, named it. Well, it had already been in a charter 2 years earlier, so it couldn't have been him that named it. The thing about it is that when Latour sold all of his property, because he owned more than just Merlegash, sold it to Thomas Temple, when Temple was describing his land to his son-in-law, he started with Merlegash. My land goes from Merlegash down to what other places, Fort Chew, I think, and places like that. So William Alexander had to know what the word meant and know that area if he was going to single it out as one of the things he was granting to these people. And it was on so many maps, so many early maps. So I think that he literally just picked a Gaelic name, part of the alliance. We'll call it Merlegash, and it's going to be yours now.
James, could the alliance have been between the Scottish and the Mi'kmaq instead of the Scottish and the French?
Well, it could have been, and he did have an alliance with the Mi'kmaq too, but the charter itself was for the French Latours, so that leads me to believe it was for them. But I think he wanted an alliance with everybody. There's many indications that he wanted peace and prosperity for everyone and did not want war, because for one thing, it was his family, his sons, that were predominantly over there, and a lot of his friends that were clan chieftains, or their people anyway. And he wouldn't want those people to get massacred, so he was a diplomat. He wanted to do this all diplomatically, and he actually called it a utopia. And he was friends. I point out in some of my books how close he was to Sir Francis Bacon, and Sir Francis Bacon actually wrote a book called The New Atlantis, which was about a utopia to the west, and it was published posthumously, or whatever, how they say that, when he died. But that was right during the time when Alexander was going over there. So what I've thought about Bacon is that he was concerned, in his writing of his, that he's concerned that somebody's going to plagiarize him or destroy his scientific works. And so I could see him going to his buddy and saying, here are copies of my better scientific papers. Take them with you and disseminate them around Nova Scotia so people understand this science like I'm trying to get people here to understand it, because he's like the father of the modern scientific method. And so if there was something of Bacon's there, I would rather guess that it was his scientific papers. But I have to tell you, he was also involved in the Plymouth colony. People don't realize this, but the Plymouth Company had been founded way back in like 1606, I think. And there had been several failed attempts to make settlements where the people just disappeared or gave up and came back or whatever. So earlier in 1620, when the Mayflower came over late in that year, a petition was made to the king to reinstate the Plymouth Company with these specific underwriters for it. And the very first person to sign it was Sir Francis Bacon. And on the committee of the management or governing committee was Sir William Alexander. So they were direct, and Sir Francis George was the man who, he lived in Plymouth. He was the governor of Plymouth, England, and he had sort of put the whole group of investors together. So you have they're like considered the grandfathers of American settlement in America, and all three of them are involved in the Plymouth colony, and then George and William Alexander are involved in the founding of Nova Scotia. So you have to think of that history. I'd say from Cape Cod all the way up to Newfoundland, you have to think of that as one big history happening during the early 1600s.
James, if I could send you back in time to, let's say, the year 1632 in Nova Scotia, what would you talk about with the Scots?
First thing I'd say is, let me see the treasure. And then I'd probably say, I'm staying behind and I'm going up to New Ross to live. Because 50 Scots did stay behind, roughly 50. And Razilli did capture them eventually. And you got to figure, if they had a treasure buried there and they had an estate up on the hill, some of them are going to say, I'm not afraid of a few French. They're on the other side in Port Royal. I don't care. I'm going to stay here. You guys can go home. Plus the fact that if a ship sunk, they would have that much less passenger space. So somebody might have to stay behind. So I'd probably be one of those 50 that stayed behind. I'll guard the treasure and live up in the castle on the hill. And you never know what you'd do. I probably would be so scared. Be such a wimp compared to all those people. But yeah, and of course I'd want to talk to whoever the leader was at the time that year. William Alexander Jr. left a little bit earlier than 1632, and then George Home was his second in charge, and he took over, and then a guy named Andrew Forrester was third in line, and he eventually took over. So those two names are very prominent in the whole story too. And I did dwell on some of them a little bit. And the Forrester family, members of the Forrester family, moved to Virginia right around the exact same time as the Alexanders moved there. So I believe they were some of the people that stayed behind. And now that it was bad enough having the French against you, but now when you have your own country against you, we got to get out of town, basically. So And whether the Alexanders dug up some of it and took it to Alexandria, I don't know. But I will tell you, 2 men from his line tried to regain William Alexander's titles and land. One of them was actually named William Alexander, who was a close friend and a general under George Washington, and he petitioned Scotland and England to recognize him as the new Lord Stirling, which was William Alexander's title. And Scotland did, the powers to be in Scotland, but they were weakened, of course, because they were dominated by England, did. He couldn't get the people in London to do it. But he still went around calling himself Lord Stirling in the United States, even though he didn't have any official documentation to say he was. Then another gentleman who was an in-law, I mean, he was an Alexander somewhere in his blood, but his last name had changed to a mother or grandmother, somebody married. He made a petition too, and a whole entire book, like an inch thick, was written about all the efforts he made in the court cases and everything. And he says in that book, the only reason I'm not being recognized is because I'm entitled to a vast fortune.
And yeah, clue right there.
What fortune is he talking about? And I had to kind of chuckle a little bit in Joan Harris's book. She states at one point, what if this was the Alexander estate, what if some of his family had tried to come back and claim it, and they might come back and try to claim it while we're living here? Little did she know that 2 people already did. Another William Alexander and another Alexander through blood had already tried to reclaim it and couldn't. And it's kind of funny how their history there dissipated. When they left the property, they kind of clammed up about it. And I think part of that was probably due to the ridicule that Joan received. But I think she was a psychic. I really do, from some of the things that I've read. And, there's a lot of people out there that may be listening to this that don't believe in psychics, but I absolutely believe in them. I got evidence. But, and her husband was a teacher, but they moved to Ontario, and she died in 2007, but a man named Ronald Harris died just in the last few years. He was 102 years old, and he was a holistic practitioner. And he did not mention a wife named Joan, but all the places in the world that he traveled were the same places that she said she had traveled, and they lived in India. Everything, that part of the story was identical for both of them. And everything about, because she had a website about New Ross, everything was wiped from the internet. Absolutely wiped. And there are these services that they're like called Time Machine or Web Archive or whatever that go back on, because websites end up landing on different servers all over. Like if I create one right now, it could be on 50 different servers. So even if you destroy your website, throw it all away and everything, it still exists in one of these time capsules on another server. So these services go out and scan everyone they can get access to look for it. And there was nothing before, I think, 2010 about them at all, personally from them. So I actually wrote the company, and I said, I know they were there as early as 1970s, and they had a website until whatever year the website was up. Why can't I find anything? And they said, because it's all been wiped. Somebody paid somebody to go online to wipe out all of that information. So when I was talking to Jeff the other day, Jeff Freeman, I said, I hate to use the word spooky, but I can't think of another word right now to explain a lot of what has gone on and even currently is going on. I don't think it's an accurate word, although in layman's terms, it describes some of it pretty darn good. And I'm going to search for that better word. And of course, a lot of that too, especially if you've been working with a psychic, but all of your other background and everything that and we've all heard the stories of Oak Island and all that. So a lot of things happen in life that people just ignore or write off quickly as a coincidence that are not that in any way, stretch, or form. And some of them are based on somebody's intention that they wanted it to happen. Some of them, I think, are based on some other world intention that somebody, just like when I found that book on Sir Walter Scott's, the exact book I was looking for and the exact poem I was looking for. And just like I found that book up in Lunenburg at the bookstore, it's too far beyond coincidence. And you know, I always say, take half of my theory and throw it away. The other half still is incredible.
It's a great theory. And I think that Joan Harris would be so pleased with what you have uncovered.
Maybe she had a hand in it. Who knows?
All right, James. In regards to Oak Island and what's going to happen on Oak Island in the future, let's say the treasure hunt might continue, they might find more artifacts. What would please you the most? If they found something or if they figured something out, what would that be? What is it that you are hoping for or waiting for?
Well, I guess obviously if they pulled up a treasure, a piece of jewelry or something that exactly matched what was on the treasure list. I mean, they've pulled up 3 things that are close, you know, but I mean, if they pulled up something that exactly matched, because the treasure list was pretty descriptive and it's accurate. I found it in the Freemason records, the Privy Council records, and the court records, and they all relatively match. You know, if anything, the Freemasons has the best description of it. And he was the 3rd Freemason, you know, so that might be why. But so I would say something like that, but also anything that would point to Alexander or the Scots or the court of Charles I. I doubt it'd be James I because when they first went in 23, he was still alive. He was leading the charge, King James I. But then just as they founded the Knights Baronet, he passed away. So any Knights Baronet, hey, a Knights Baronet medallion. We found a Knights of the Order of the Garter. Let's find a Knights Baronet medallion laying in the dirt somewhere. Get our Tonka toys out and go play in the dirt. See what we can find. Something along that line that would be incontrovertible proof, you know, that or coins that date to that time period too. You know, they found Charles II coins there. And oh, by the way, not only do you have George Monk arresting William Alexander's son-in-law and demanding that treasure up on the island, the Orkneys, and Christopher Monk hiring William Phipps and possibly giving him his medallion, but a monk that would be, I believe, either the great-grandson or great-great-grandson of the original monk, George Monk, was one of the first people to survey on Oak Island. He went there with a group of military surveyors in the early 1750s. And they weren't surveying into lots. That was done in 1762. They were just surveying the island, and they may have been surveying a ton of islands, who knows. But just the fact that you have a guy from the same family on that island, and I just think that it was, they knew something happened. The Knights Baronet families, the Freemason families, which were kind of identical, and the Mayflower Plymouth colony families knew something happened and knew a treasure was left over there. They had the general idea that, well, it was either at Port Royal, because the first thing that William Phipps did when he got to Nova Scotia was he went to Port Royal and he wrote in his daily logbook, we continue to search by land, by sea, and underground for plunder.
Underground, really? Underground.
Yeah, and plunder is, the definition is stolen treasure. You know, so he was literally saying, we are searching for stolen treasure underground, you know. So, and that was long before any of the legend of Oak Island ever developed. And he came down as far as La Have. Sedgwick came as far as La Have. We know that for a fact. And if either one of them came overland, the natural trails there led right up to New Ross and turn the corner at the Charing or the Charing Cross, turn, because that's what the word means, turn, and would head right down Gold River to Oak Island.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not, the distance isn't that great. If you're there to conquer people, are you going to just stop 40 minutes away or 40 miles away from another place that they could potentially be? You're going to go everywhere, try to find everybody so you can stop what's going on or dominate them or whatever. So,
James, we have talked about Oak Island for quite some time now, but did you know there is a second Oak Island in Nova Scotia?
Well, I know that there's one up above, not in the Bay of Fundy, but above it that looks like a lobster.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that I've heard that there was one in the Bay of Fundy too. And I had read somewhere long ago that they actually filled the land in from the one Oak Island to make more arable land that would be flat, but would be fertilized good, from the topsoil. So what do you know about the 2 or 3 Oak Islands?
I believe the first place where I learned about it was in a book by Michael Bradley, Holy Grail Across the Atlantic. And in that book, Michael Bradley says that if you are at New Ross, you can either choose to follow the Gold River south and you will end up in Mahone Bay next to our Oak Island, or you could choose to go north, follow the Gaspereau River, and it will take you to the Bay of Fundy and the other Oak Island.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. And then the third one up on the above. I actually found some nautical notes on how to sail up there in that upper part. I guess it would be sort of part of the mouth of the St. Lawrence up in there. And it mentioned Oak Island and how you had to get around it and everything. But so why they named them that, one of the theories is that the oak trees were planted on purpose, and they knew they were a tall oak tree, so that when you're, if they say look for the island with the tall oak trees, and you pull into Mahone Bay, you're going to see it really quickly, see which one it is. So, yeah, that's another place to go. Another book, The 3 Oak Islands. But I'll tell you, the one that I've been toying with is the title would be Oak Island Secret Societies, Curses, and the Occult, because there has been so much, those things kind of dominate the background legend of so much of New Ross and the Oak Island. But again, I'm kind of burnt out right now, and summer's coming and COVID's kind of lessening a little bit. I've had my shots. So I'm kind of looking forward to just getting out and getting around and doing lawn work and whatever, So I don't want to be holed up even though my office is really cool and it looks out into the forest and everything. I put out 3 books in 2020, but what else was I going to do? That's what kept me from going insane. I think it was put those books out.
James, the way I see it, you have left your mark on Oak Island in the form of the books you have written, the theory you have coined, all that you have contributed to the current treasure hunt. But there is something else that you left behind on Oak Island, and it's displayed in the visitor center. Can you tell us what that is?
Oh, yeah. So I think the year was 2018, and I just arrived and went into the interpretive center because I hadn't seen it before. I don't think it was ready before then. I think they were still working on it. And so I was looking around, and that's when Rick threw me that black T-shirt that I wear to watch the show. And he said, I need a quote from you. And I was in the print business for a long time, and a quote meant you would figure out what something would cost. So that was the only idea I could think of as a quote. And they didn't have any quotes on the wall yet. They were still getting everything built in there and display cases and whatever. And I said, well, what do you want to quote on? And he said, I want a quote on the wall right there from you. And I was like, that is unbelievable. So I said, well, the last thing I want to do is say something stupid and have something stupid up there for the rest of my life. So I said, well, can I get back to you on that? I'll when I get back home, I'll think about it for a few days and I'll email you. And he said, all right. So I was sitting up in my little office there, and I thought, well, the Oak Island isn't necessarily about a specific treasure or specific people. It's about the whole idea of hunting for treasure on an island, which is something that when I was a kid, I used to read, Alexander Dumas and or Dumas, however you say that, Jack London, all those guys. It was all adventure novels and stuff. And I thought, what this is really doing is letting people be a kid again. But I didn't want to just say that because that, is kiddish. So for some reason, again, something snapped and I got this intuition of what to say and I just typed it right out. And now I hope I can paraphrase it correctly because I don't have it in front of me. But Oak Island is not so much a mystery to be solved. It is a chance to experience the unapologetic fascination of youth once again.
That's wonderful.
And, anyway, so the next year when I went, there was on a wall right under Gilbert Hedden and right above the Reader's Digest display that they have of the original Reader's Digest. So, the whole experience from 2016 when I first wrote them, and I think to myself sometimes, what if I hadn't written them? Because I'd written a few other books before that, and they were niche books. And so my niche audience bought a bunch of them, but then it trailed off, And, but this niche is 10 million people around the world. And I think sometimes, because that was sort of an intuition too. I just leaned back in the lazy boy and I heard probably Clotworthy say, Oak Island, Nova Scotia. And I'd just been updating my family history where I was talking about the Premier Knight Baronet of Nova Scotia. And I thought, Oak Island, Nova Scotia, Premier Knight Baronet of Nova Scotia, I wonder if they know anything about it or whatever. That kicked the whole thing off. And then if it wasn't for the people there reciprocating and wanting to have a conversation and all of that, and it took about 6 months of emails before they said, you know what, you've done so much research and we've traded so many emails, you have to put it in a book form because it's all going to get lost. It doesn't exist anywhere. And that kicked the whole thing off. And then it's just been, they suggested the second book. By the third book, I knew I had to write that one because that had the medallion on it, but it also had the story of what the treasure was. I actually had the list of the treasure. And then during that writing, I was realizing that some of these people that had connections to the people that settled on Oak Island in the 1700s. So I started exploring that, and that was Oak Island Endgame. And I thought that was kind of the icing on the cake of Knights. But then when I realized it was the 400th anniversary of the Mayflower, and I knew that some of these people were connected to the Mayflower, I thought I'm going to check every single person that I can find on any records that Doug sent me or anywhere I can find and see how they connect. And so many people connected back. Those chapels, Franklin Roosevelt, his grandfather, Delano. It was just endless of people that a guy named Emery used to be a landowner in Plymouth. And I thought, my gosh, this is like, obviously they would have known something went on because they were the reason why Nova Scotia was founded. But look at all of them that went up there. So that's when I wrote that book. And then I thought for sure I was done then because, my gosh, how many can you do? And I'm looking back now and I thought I should have just called it the Yearly Journal, the Oak Island Yearly Journal, because it's been one book a year. But although 3 of them were written in 2020. But I was convinced I wasn't going to do anything. And with things loosening up and hopefully spring on the way in a different year for 2021, I just accidentally tripped over the Nolan Cross pointing to there. At the same time, I found this, I was looking in this book, found the reference to this painting. I found out that the Premier Knight Baronet owned property just 50 to 60 miles away from Oak Island. And I found out the Charing Cross connection all at once. I mean, practically in a matter of a couple of weeks. And I'm like, I had to develop all of those, but I'm like, well, I can't not put this stuff down because this is some of the most important stuff I'm probably presenting. So I have to write at least one last book. So again, I'm kind of burnt out from it at the moment, but who knows? And I don't have any promises or even any inclinations, but I wouldn't be surprised if I'm on Oak Island again. I don't know if it'll be this year or another year, or if I have to just force myself on the island or whatever. But I mean, the first year I thought I'd never be back. Now I've been there 3 years, but on 10 separate days. So I've spent a lot of time.
I'd say by now you are a household name on Oak Island.
Yeah. Well, if nothing else, when I'm gone, they'll say he was the most prolific book writer about Oak Island. I didn't believe a word he said, but my God, he wrote the most books.
Well, I admire the fact that you are so passionate about this theory. You keep at it. You're not done. Come on, you have to write another book.
Well, we'll see what gets thrown in my face. And I mean, that would be a good direction to go, the one I was talking about. So.
And I know that for your last book about Oak Island and New Ross, you also spoke with Carmen Leck, the blacksmith who works in New Ross.
Yes.
What did he have to say? What kind of feedback did he give you?
He said that this new book would shock a lot of people.
Okay.
And he 100% signs on to the Charing Cross story, and it makes total sense to him. The timeline, the fact that there's only two in the world, they're both, so close to the foundation. And the other significance too is near the Charing Cross in London, there's a short distance away is the bridge that goes across the Thames River and goes to the Shakespeare's play. Well, at the Charing Cross in Nova Scotia, there's a road, crossroads right below it, that the road goes across the Gold River on a bridge. And that road happens to be called Windsor Road. And the road in London that goes across the bridge, if you go the opposite way, you go to Windsor Castle. So, I mean, there's just so many little things are they all just coincidences? Are they just stars falling from the sky? Or is this all connected? And I just think it has to be. And again, throughout half of it, the other half is still unbelievably impressive, or whatever word you want to say about it. So.
All right. The last thing I want to ask you is, why would Sir William Alexander build his estate in the middle of Nova Scotia at New Ross instead of on the coast?
Well, he was a big fan of a guy named Vilgenon, who was a Frenchman who had been very instrumental in Scottish history. And that man actually went to probably Canada, didn't say where, and he built himself what Alexander referred to as a retreat to escape the problems of the homeland. And he looked up to this guy as his pattern for what he wanted to do. And one of the Mi'kmaq told Joan Harris that he built himself a little palace in the woods. And I think that he wanted to be far enough away from sight of French ships or Spanish ships or anybody going by. And also that was the point where, as you said earlier, you could just go across the hill, get on the other river and follow it down to the Bay of Fundy where Port Royal was. So I figure that he may have wanted to mirror his home in London as far as having a big river right by it, and named the area Charing Cross. And also there's a considerable vantage point up there. I mean, it would be a little difficult to attack the castle. I mean, it would depend on how deep the forests were back then. But there is some vantage point to see people coming if you were going to be attacked or whatever. So I don't know. I think it was a combination of wanting a beachhead that could be effective to spy on the French, but also to be out of sight, to be a little palace in the woods, or what did you call it, a refuge or whatever. So I think that's why he chose it.
Yes.
And it's about halfway.
A refuge.
It's about halfway across. Yeah. So that's the only reason I can think for it.
Great. Thank you, James. This has been an amazing tour through history for me. I have read all of your books so far, but it's different when I hear it straight from you. So I really appreciate that you took the time to speak to me. I think we had it going for 3 hours.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, for those folks that end up watching it, if you're going to buy any of my books, I would buy the last one, Oak Island and New Ross, because it has some of the more amazing things. And I mean, all of them have something pretty amazing in them, but this one, and also the whole second half of the book is laying out a timeline from 1603, when King James became King of England, he was already King of Scotland, all the way up to basically, I think, 1654, when the New Ross Foundation was torn down. So, and I don't dwell in every year doesn't take 10 pages. It's like some years take a half a page. I'm just pulling out the things that mattered there. So anyway, I'm glad you enjoyed them, and I've enjoyed working with you, and we certainly enjoyed meeting you folks and everything. And that'll be a hard day to forget, being up at New Ross. That was kind of seared in my brain.
We hope to see you again, and so maybe we can get this top knight baronets to come there too.
Yeah, that'd be great. Get them to bring the painting with them. Well, that would be the coup d'etat.
Yes. Well, I know that you have been looking for this treasure for a long time, or helping the Laginas find it. But in my eyes, you yourself are a treasure.
Oh, thanks. And I think everybody up there is too, you and everyone. I mean, people can't even imagine how nice all of you folks are. I mean, it depends on where you live down here, but you can live in towns, well, particularly the town I live in now, not the beach area I'm at, but the main town, a lot of just stuck up people that you'll say hi to them, they just walk on by you. Then I've lived in other towns where everybody's saying hi to you, you know who they are. But up there, everybody is enthused about the treasure and the hunt, and there's no reason to not be nice to each other. It's just, I think you find so much more through cooperation than trying to go your own way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, well, anyway, thank you. It was fun.
Thank you, James. Have a happy Easter.
Okay, you too.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye
Say
now.
hi to everyone up there. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.